Recently, I reviewed a game called Kenshi, which is a game fresh out of early access that has apparently, according to the PR email anyway, been in development for nearly a decade and a half. To match the huge development time, Kenshi boasts a pretty ridiculous scale, both mechanically and, well, just map-wise. It's by no means a pretty looking game. I mean, the developer is literally called Lo-Fi Games, but it is a good game, maybe even a great one. So, with that in mind, why did I just give it 3 out of 5? Especially when you take into consideration the tongue bath the game has been getting on the Steam reviews. Well, the answer to that question is sort of complicated. I'm Will, with Clickist, and let's take a further look into Kenshi's barrier to entry. So, if you can't tell from all of this high quality gaming footage I'm showing you, Kenshi is an RPG. Specifically, it's a strategy RPG with survival elements and a particularly Eastern flavour. It has a deep, living world filled with factions inspired by both ninja and samurai, history and mythology. It also has more tutorials than an entire school year. Please note, if you're not from England, you probably don't even have tutorials at school, so just ignore that joke. Seriously though, your first hour or more in the game is spent going through these text boxes. You have to learn how to control your character, how to find food, which it doesn't necessarily tell you directly, and a whole bunch of other stuff to do with the factions and building systems. Just looking at it makes me want to bloody die. If you manage to get past all of this, you're still probably going to die about 50 times before you actually manage to start playing the game properly. My first time in the game, I got dumped into a character creator with a lot of sliders, then had to try and use them to make 4 separate characters. Once I waded through all of that mess and managed to throw a group of characters together that looked like Play-Doh creations gone wrong, I was dumped into a ruin in the middle of a desert and started reading tutorials. Barely 20 minutes later, all but one of my characters was killed by bandits who had literally just stumbled across me in the wild and murdered most of my team members. So I rebooted and tried again. After several failed attempts, including trying to be a trader, trying to be a builder, and even an assassin, which was disastrous by the way, I managed to eke out a meagre living by spending my daytime mining a single iron chunk, and my nights running around in circles in the town I had spawned in. Apart from being exactly the sort of thing that a coked up dwarf might do, this is how I needed to operate to actually play the game properly. Why is that? Well, it's because from the get-go your character stats are piss poor, including athletics, which affects your running speed. See, if you need to escape from a fight, which early on you need to do in every fight, you need to have trained your athletics. How do you do that? Well, in my case, it was running in circles, over and over again. Eventually I got it to around 50, which meant that almost nothing could touch me, leaving me free to go out into the world and continuously mine until I had enough iron to pay for food, weapons, and whatever else I needed to get my hands on. Kenshi has this philosophy of not holding your hand, which in many cases is quite admirable. I mean, look at Dark Souls. That game doesn't hold your hand and it's led to a worldwide franchise that's worth millions today. So why is Kenshi any different? Well, the real answer is the barrier to entry. While a lot of people probably don't want to, pretty much anyone can play Dark Souls. It's available on a lot of different systems with different control schemes. All of the commands are explained early on and are pretty simple to grasp. While it might take a long time to fully understand and get the most out of, after an hour or two you can probably be enjoying the deep storytelling and challenging boss fights. Kenshi does have a similarly deep lore and a similar-ish way of conveying it. You pick up the story of the world by conversing with random people, seeing how different factions react to each other, and generally interpreting the design of the world and the characters. The issue is that all of that stuff lies behind mountains and mountains of tutorials, and self-guided study! It can take you 40 plus hours of gameplay, not to mention several YouTube tutorials, to get a real feeling for how things work in the world of Kenshi. Learning about house building, learning about crop farming, figure out how in God's name you level up attack skills without bleeding out. Then you can slowly tweeze out the inherent meaning in the world and the value of the gameplay. Beyond that point lies hundreds of hours of gameplay, different starting scenarios, and a whole community worth of min-maxing threads and world discussion. But here's the killer question. If you have to play 40 hours and do a whole bunch of your own research, is it even worth it? The game might be the best thing ever made deep down, but how many people are going to have time to wade through it all? There are games out there that have hundreds of hours of gameplay without all the research, not to mention work, family time, sleeping. To get the full experience from Kenshi would take a normal person perhaps years and years of their life. To use a fitting analogy, your pie can have the best filling in the world, but if the crust is 70 feet thick and made of concrete, I'm probably not going to bother eating it. The point of this video is not to simply bash Kenshi and call it a bad game. In fact, even for the comparatively short amount of time that I've been playing it, I can tell that if I let it, the game would suck me in and probably never let me go, like an amorous sarlacc pit. The message here is that the barrier to entry is an important part of making your game good, or at least making it enjoyable. 40 plus hours to really get into the meat of a game isn't even the problem. If those 40 plus hours were enjoyable and devoid of constant grinding for survival, then sign me the hell up. But Kenshi goes about everything in a really odd way. It turns learning the ropes into a 4-week correspondence course. It front loads itself with tutorial messages and an overly complicated GUI. If my first experience with the game had been immediately enjoyable, I probably would have been more up for the huge slog that came after it. Instead, I was immediately overwhelmed, and without any sort of investment in the world or characters, I was just counting down the hours till I'd played enough for my review. So, what could they have done to make it better? Well, the answer to that question might actually be found in the realm of tabletop games. A lot of tabletop RPGs have complicated rule sets, which can be a pain to teach to new players. In most cases, there are a few things that these games do to help that. First, they suggest a mini campaign to start out on, and in some cases even provide you with a pre-rolled set of characters with good stats for starting out. It's also pretty common to have a set of the more advanced rules which are introduced piece by piece, to allow new players to ease into the complex stuff. Translating this to Kenshi is simple enough. A starting scenario where you're given pre-made squads of characters with decent-ish starting stats. Maybe then have a small area safe from enemies so that you can learn how building, farming, trading and stat building works. Maybe even reserve some of the more advanced mechanics until they've managed to get through the early stages. Obviously this wouldn't have to be the case for every mode, but having a mode that includes these features signposted for new players would allow a lot more people to enjoy the game. And that's just one way of doing it. Others include the MMO model, like having starting areas where NPCs explain stuff to you. The standard tutorial model with safe areas and force-fed rule sets is less appealing, but would also work. Regardless, there are many options out there to let people get used to the world and its rules, before they're just dumped starving into the desert. Now, when this sort of topic comes up for discussion, there is always a certain group of people out there who ask the question, so what? So what if it's too much work for the filthy casuals? This is a hardcore game, for hardcore gamers. If you can't sink 40 hours of your life into a tutorial longer than most actual games, then you shouldn't be playing it anyway. Well, apart from the fact that that just kind of feels like a cop-out, having a first time mode which would make things easier for new players hurts no one. Are you seriously suggesting that the deep, involving experience of Kenshi would have been made worse if you'd been able to understand it better from the outset, instead of having to wade through the discoveries already made by the community surrounding the game? Regardless of how you feel about the issue, Kenshi's impenetrability hurts no one but the game itself. Even with an experience as interesting as it is, most people just don't have the time or desire to sink so much into a single game, especially one that just feels inhospitable for new players. There are so many options out there that could have made the experience of starting a new game of Kenshi friendlier, could truly have made Kenshi a classic that would be remembered for the rest of gaming history. As it stands, the only people who will remember Kenshi in 30 years are likely to be that hardcore set of fans who stuck with it for over a decade and already managed to break through the barriers that the game puts up around itself. As for the rest of us, well, we'll probably be playing games that actually want us to be there. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it and want more, feel free to subscribe, like it and share it with your friends. How do you feel about learning curves in games? Have you ever played a game that made you give up before you got to the good stuff? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you just enjoy listening to me talk, then feel free to check out my channel too.